Welcome back, DIYers. Today's video, we're going to take what looks like worthless, rotten trim boards, transform them into a new trim board in order to replace an old, ugly trim and make it look new again. So how do we go about this? Well, if you happen to see the window trim replacement videos, it was a two-part series where I took these trim boards off my window, and I thought they were worthless and rotten, but I happened to save them. Sometimes it pays to be kind of a pack rat. So I had them laying around, and so one day I was cutting the rotten ends off of them and noticed that after I cut them, that the end of the lumber looked like brand new. So I got to thinking, well, maybe I can salvage enough out of these in order to replace those rotten trim boards and make it look new again. So how was I going to do that? Well, first of all, I looked at the edges to see what the edges look like. Now this particular board is rotten right here, but above it and below it is good. So the next thing I did was I went up and took measurements of how long of boards that I needed to replace all that. And then I started taking measurements between the nail holes to see how much I could salvage out, and was it long enough to salvage out a piece to replace that. Lo and behold, I found 4 pieces that I could do just that with. So let's get started on this little project. So the first thing I did was set up my little giant platform system, and I'll leave a link down below. But I set this up so I could set my tools on the platform and not have to worry about climbing up and down the ladder to get up here to work on this. And it gave me more freedom to move around to work on this project. So the first thing I have to do is I have to cut loose all the caulking that I put in before, which kind of sucks because it was nice. Cut loose the caulking from the miters, cut loose the caulking from this non-functional gable vent, and then we can take a pry bar and pry them off. I think I'll go ahead and take this off also because it's barely held on. The nails I put on barely went through by ½ inch, so we'll take this off, clean all this up, get all this caulking off of here. Earlier in this process where I was salvaging these boards by peel bond primering the rotted edges and caulking, I spray painted under here because I didn't know if they painted under this, which it don't look like they did. But I wanted some paint under here to kind of protect it, and then I just laid in a bunch of caulking in there. So let me get this cleaned up and we'll go on from there. Okay, I got all the caulking scraped off and got that cleaned up as much as I can for right now. What I'm going to do is I can mill these up. I'm going to cut this edge off a little bit more till I get rid of that little bit of rot right there. And then we'll measure these out and get them all cut up. So first let's get this milled off. Oh, and I'm going to go ahead and back bevel these also. Now this is a 12 by 18. That's what it says on the imprinted side there. So basically what I'm going to do is get this mitered corner dead on there where I want it, and then just come over here and mark this edge, and then my miter needs to come right to that, and in doing so it'll get rid of that little bit of blemish right there. Remember, you can always cut more off, you can't put more back on. It's a good tight miter. I could take off just a hair. Okay, that looks to be dead on perfect. And yes, it is. So that's how I'm gonna get all these cut. I'll finish getting these cut and I'll come back and we'll move on to the next part. Okay, I got all the boards milled up, got good tight miters. Now this gable vent is just a hair out of square at this end, and so because of that I've got a fine little gap here and up here that I don't have elsewhere, but otherwise I've got good tight miter joints all the way around. Okay, we got the trim boards all cut, and there's a few things I still got to do before we're ready to put these back up. And just so you know, when we were starting this project, it was not my intent to take this gable vent off. The fact that it came off so easy is a little concerning, and one thing I found is they barely had nails probably long enough to hold it up there. There's maybe a ½ inch out the back. But the other thing that's concerning me, and I'm gonna have to check out, is how easy all that came off. My concern is there's no backing behind that siding for this stuff to nail into, and what they've nailed into is just siding itself, which isn't enough to hold. So I'll have to go up in the attic and investigate that. And if I have to do something there, that's just another little add-on. So as you can see, I spray primered this, and I primered it really heavy. I shouldn't say really heavy. I primered it heavy in the intent to come back and sand. As you can see, I've started and got most of it done. And basically what I'm doing is I'm sanding it down to try and get some of the imperfections out before I paint it so they don't show up. Now these nail holes, I think I'm going to fill those with Bondo and then sand over them and make it like they're never there before, and put new nail holes in when I nail it back up. And the reason is this stuff feels like a hard styrofoam kind of plastic stuff. And so when they drove the nails in, they drove them and sunk them pretty deep. And so there's not a lot, I'm worried there's not enough meat in this to hold the new nail, especially if I drive it down further than what they had. So that scares me a little bit. So because of that, I think I'll fill these, and then when I nail it, I'll nail it instead of just kind of randomly like they did. I'll strategically put the nails in the corners. And like I say, I'm hoping I don't have to put any backing up there in the attic to nail this up to. So the first thing I want to do is I want to wash this down. I've got all the caulking off and scraped off and everything that I can. But I want to wash this down and get the dirt off of here, because I do want to sand this area where it is, and I don't want to sand it with that dirt on there and sand the dirt into the siding. So I'll clean this off, and then while that's drying, I'm going to finish sanding up that vent, and I'm going to put another coat of primer on it, and that way that can be drying. And then I've got one more little milling thing I have to do to the trim boards themselves, and then we'll be primering the edges and the back of that. And then by then, this should be dry enough I can sand it, wipe it down, and we can primer this and hopefully get this all ready to put back together maybe tomorrow. All right, I got the sanding done on the gable vents. I need to do some Bondo in that, but next thing I wanted to do was finish milling up these trim boards that are cut. And basically, I just want to take off a little bit of each side just to clean them up so that they got a nice, clean, fresh edge is all I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a whole lot of material to come off. One thing I got to thinking, I probably should have done that first before I cut these. I'm not sure how much it's going to throw it off by taking this little bit off of the inside. It shouldn't do anything for the outside, but for the inside, I'm not sure. So I've got my planer set up. I got that digital readout on here set at 3.5. I got a scrap board I'm going to run through and see if it hits it. If it hits it and takes some off, then I'll run these through. I'm barely looking to take like a 30-second off of each side is really all I'm looking for. So if you're wondering about this digital readout, you can, it can be up here. I'll have a link for a video I did on that. That part's done, and now I can move on to peel bond primering. And you can see it cleaned up the edges really nice. And then I went ahead, and the holes that were made by the nails that held in the trim, I caulked those holes over and wiped them, as you can see me doing. And I'll let that set up a little bit before I primer. And now we're ready to primer these trim boards that I cut. And I want you to look at, compared to what they started, how nice this looks like brand new lumber if you didn't look at this side. And all of them look like that. And so that's the biggest purpose for this video, is showing how to repurpose that wood that looked like trash, but actually turned into some really nice boards. So of course we're going to the old standard peel bond primer here. And I'm going to peel bond primer the edges, the miters, and the back. I'll let that set up, and then tomorrow I'll paint that in the morning early, along with trying to get this painted early in the morning and let that stuff dry. And then maybe we can get these nailed back up by tomorrow afternoon. All right, I got all the sides, edges, and backs of the trim boards primed with the peel bond primer. Now it's time to do the house here and primer it. I'm using my Fuji Mini Mite 5. Got a respirator and I just got a stain blocking exterior primer is all I'm using. New day, new shirt. So I got up this morning and I sanded over the holes that I'm going to fill with the Bondo on the gable vents, and I filled those up. And then while that was curing or drying, whatever you want to call it, I went over and went ahead and painted the back and the sides of the trim boards that are going to go up there. And then when I was done with that, I went back and sanded the Bondo down level to where it needed to be. Now you'll see me using a putty knife. If you kind of get it just before it cures, it's still a little soft, and you can use a putty knife to kind of scrape some of the heavy stuff off so you don't have to sand so much. And they say you should sand with 80 grit sandpaper or 60, but I went with 100 because that's 60 or 80 is just too much for that surface, and I didn't want to take that much primer off. Once I got that all sanded like I wanted, I went ahead and spray primered the areas I sanded, and we'll let that dry. Now we're ready to paint up there where we primered yesterday. Now I'm using a Fuji Platinum Mini Mite 5. Now for some of you that are just doing this and just getting started, or this is your only project, you don't have to use this, or you can rent one. You can use a brush. I just happen to have one, so I'm using it. So I've got my paint mixed in here. I'm using a 1.8 tip. I'm going to spray that. While that's drying, I'll see if the primer on that gable vent's dry. If it is, I'll give it a light sand with probably 220, maybe 400, and then get it ready to paint also, because it's a different color. Oh, and some of you may have noticed when I was using it before for the primer, when I wasn't spraying, paint was just running out the tip. It wasn't because the gun's bad operator. There's a spring that goes in behind here, and I didn't have that spring, and it wasn't allowing the needle point to push back in there and shut it off. I got it in there this time though. Okay, I'm gonna give that a couple hours. We'll see if it's dry enough by then, and if so, then we'll try and put these boards back up. Okay, got it sanded. It's all prepped, cleaned off, and ready to paint. So again, use my airless sprayer and lay down a coat of paint. Let this dry. Well, I didn't quite make it to getting them hung up yesterday. And as I suspected when I went up in the attic, yeah, there's no framing where this is being nailed. So here's a little rude drawing of what it is. So these are the 2x4s up there, and then the vent itself and the trim goes around it. And that's exactly where it sits, is right over this single 2x4. So they're just nailing where they nailed. They didn't nail anything into this. Where they nailed was just into siding only. So I went in the attic, I got some measurements. I'm gonna use a 2x10 to span across here and here to nail all this in. Then we'll climb up in the attic and get it put in there before it gets too hot. All right, got them all cut. Now, 2 of these are gonna have pocket holes to attach them, whereas the rest I can do at the end. So basically I just used a Craig. This is a K3, they make K5. I think there's even a newer K5 out, but this is a K3, I've had it quite a while. I got, for this wider board, I got 2 in the center and 1 on each end, or side I should say, act like a toenail. And then I'm using Spax 3-inch screws. These are more of a structural construction screw versus a deck screw. And it takes a T20 Torx head. So next stop, the attic. All right, we're up in the attic, and here's the wall where this is all going. May not be the greatest view, but it's tight quarters here. So 2 of the holes I left open, and I pushed wire through, so I know where they are. Those line up with 2 holes on the vent, so when I put it back, it'll be right back where it was and then square. but it also gives me a reference range where to measure. Now, these nail holes are roughly inch to maybe inch and a half down from the top of the vent. From there to the top of the trim board's 4.5 inches. So from this nail hole, I'm going to go up 5 inches and put one of these blocks, and then come down and put another one. Now, my hope is I cut these with just a little bit of margin so they'll fit in here. Otherwise, I got to climb all the way back down and trim a little off. But we'll see. But first, let's get measured here. In case you're wondering, I got some 2 foot by 4 foot OSB decking up here that I'm sitting on, so I don't go through the ceiling. As I was telling you, this is my water protection right here. This tar paper. It's tar paper and the siding. That's my water protection. Cheap, huh? The side trim boards I'll nail toward the top and the bottom. I just won't be able to put any in the middle, and that's okay. They're not that long. I don't need any in the middle. Now, I took a couple trips down to get it just right. So I'm gonna drill in these pocket ones, and then I'll come back behind here. All right, see you outside. We'll get this stuff nailed back up. Okay, we're back outside. We're ready to nail all this up. Now what I'm gonna do is the trim itself, I'm gonna get it put together. I'll drive a finish nail in the diagonal on each miter. I'm gonna caulk the ends because this will slide right on. So I've got just enough gap that I can put this up, slide that over, and nail it up. It's gonna make it a lot easier, so I don't have to climb up and down the ladder to put these together. So I got these miter clamps on here. I'll take these off and put them back on as I go to each miter. All right, that's all done. I'll get set up and we'll nail up the vent next. Okay, for this part, I'm not using my nail gun because this is too soft and it'll punch right through it. So what I do have is one nail poking through the back to line up on that hole. I'll drive it in, I'll make sure it's level, and drive the other 3. That's how we take rotten trim boards and turn them into something good and new. Now, for those of you contemplating this project and think it's too daunting, it really isn't. Just take it one step at a time instead of thinking about the whole project at once. Split it up into small little projects. That way it's not so daunting. Before you know it, you'll have it done. Now, on this particular project, everything went really well. Don't have any real regrets or redos or what I'd have done different. So we're just one step closer to getting this whole house painted. I want to thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. And for that, we'll see you next time, and happy DIY.